Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. And welcome to today's webinar on Potter Visitor Forecasts. Are we seeing the light at the end of the tunnel? We have a great lineup of speakers today with us, and we're really going to see a comprehensive view of what the future of travel will look like in the near future. But let me just just reiterate, previously we used to do forecasts, 5-year forecasts. Well, of course, during the pandemic, it's sort of impossible to actually forecast what visitors arrivals will look like in the future. So really representing 3 scenarios, and Professor Song, our first presenter, will actually be talking about that when it's time to present. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Parangan. I am the Director of Communications and External Affairs at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and of course, I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we get right into the presentations, we have a set of great lineup of speakers, about 5 of them all together with some panel discussions. So I don't want to keep it too long. We want to go right into the presentations, but I do have some notes for all of you joining us on Zoom. So as you know, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see 2 functions, a chat function and a Q&A function. For the chat function, please do not submit any questions using this function, right? It's hard to sort of keep up on both the chat function and the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do submit them during the Q&A, in the Q&A function. Then we'll be able to answer them either during the discussion, or the panelists might just type and reply directly to you if it's very specific towards their presentation. For the chat function, feel free to introduce yourself, where you're from, how you're doing, maybe some comments or insights about some of the presentations you're seeing. Use it to engage with everyone. But yes, please don't submit any questions using that. So we're going to jump right into our first presentation. As I said, we have some great speakers with us this afternoon, and I don't want to keep everyone from it, so we can go right into it. So ladies and gentlemen, presenting our updated visitor forecast or updated scenarios, our first speaker is the Associate Dean and Mr. and Miss Chen Chak Fu Professor in International Tourism in the School of Hotel and Tourism Management at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Haiyan Song. Professor Song?
Hi, thank you, Paul. Good afternoon from Hong Kong. And today I'm going to present the update of PATA visitor forecast. Let me share the screen first. Okay. Is the screen okay?
Just full screen it.
Okay.
You're on presenter view, just swap screens.
Okay.
Okay, all good.
All right, thank you. So yes, today I'm going to update the Asia Pacific visitor forecast from 2020 to 2023, which was initially published in January this year. Since the COVID-19 situation has been evolving, so there's a need to update our initial forecast. In the initial forecast, we actually developed 3 scenarios in consideration of the severity of the COVID-19 impact, which are mild, medium, and severe scenarios. The scenario development actually is quite a complex process because this time the COVID-19 has a prolonged influence on international tourism demand over quite a long period of time, which result from the closure of airport and transportation, tourist attractions, commercial and peer-to-peer share accommodations, and also many destinations because of the influx of tourists, which further actually introduce COVID-19 cases to the destination. Therefore, many destinations actually close their border to travelers, and also visa restrictions. And also many destinations adopt the quarantine by arrival depending on which country or region you're coming from, the quarantine time can range between 7 to 21 days. So in developing those different scenarios, we first look at it, the research that has been published in the past in terms of taking the crisis into consideration when forecast future tourism demand. And also we look at the impact assessment of COVID-19 on the national economies and also tourism by different international organizations such as Oxford Economics, Euromonitor International, and also UNWTO, which are regularly update their forecasts of the national or regional economy or tourism in consideration of COVID-19 pandemic. And we also look at the information on travel restrictions, vaccine development, expert prediction on potential future outlooks, outbreaks of COVID-19. So these were the factors that considered in our initial forecast, which was published in January 2021. So this actually just give you an update of the model, the method that we use in generating the original scenario forecast. Basically, the forecast is a three-stage process. In the first stage, we actually using econometric models to generate the baseline forecast. In the second stage, because the data made available to us by PATA is that actually the data was only up to the end of 2019. So we can only use the data up to 2019 to build the statistical model and then generate a forecast into the future. But since 2020, due to COVID-19, our forecasts need to be adjusted using a scenario forecast method. So we, in the second stage, we developed some automatic adjustment in order to generate the scenario forecast in consideration of the different factors which I already listed previously. And then in the third stage, after this automatic adjustment, we invited a group of experts to make adjustment to those already adjusted forecasts, given their personal understanding of the future to make further adjustment. But those adjustment is already perhaps up to 3 months need to be further look at it. So in this particular update, we adopted a two-stage mixed method adjustment process again to look at our original forecast published in January 2021. So the first stage, in the first stage, we first look at it, our forecast, scenario forecast against the actual data which were made available in 2021, the first quarter 2021. So at that time, we actually were provided at least 2 quarters of data in 2020, i.e. quarter 1, quarter 2, or sometime even quarter 3 in 2020. So we can compare our forecasts with the actual data in 2020 to see whether our forecast is under predict or over predicts. So if it's under predict, we make adjustment proportionally according to the differences between our forecast and actual data, or downward adjustment if our forecast is over predicted the actual data in 2020. So this actually is the first stage. But in the second stage, we employed a Delphi expert adjustment approach to make additional adjustment to this proportional upward, downward adjustment based on the differences between our original forecast and the actual data in 2020. So this Delphi group expert panel actually consists of the forecasting team who actually produce PATA visitor forecast. And the team actually consists of mostly academics. We did not reach out to a large expert panel because due to time constraint. So we actually sent our initial forecast to the forecasting team members, and they look at this forecast, and with their insight into in terms of the future development of COVID-19 situation, and also a number of other factors that may influence our forecast, and to make a 2 round of back-to-back adjustment. So this actually is very necessary and useful step to make additional adjustment to make sure that our forecast as accurate as possible, given those expert input. So now let me present our updated forecast against our initial forecast. As you can see, the forecast, the comparison of the forecast between the original and the updated forecast actually are quite similar, although there's some update or adjustment, but the adjustments are not huge, which means our original forecasts are quite accurate. But if you look at the sub-region of Americas, the left-hand panel present our original forecast, and the right-hand set panel is the update. So you can see there's some downward adjustment in this sub-region over the 3 years from 2021 to 2023, but the adjustment is very small. It's only about 1 to 2%, right? So which means our forecast, initial forecast, is quite accurate. For the Northeast Asia, again, there's some upward adjustment, and in this region, actually, the adjustment is a little bit larger than Americas. So the adjustment is between 4 to 5%. So you can see the right-hand side is the initial forecast, where the right-hand side is the updated forecast. In 2023, for example, in the milder scenario, in 2023, the recovery will be 99% to that of 2019. So, which means it's almost recovered to the baseline forecast that we produced in 2019. And also in the medium and severe scenarios, the recovery rate will be 79 to 51% in comparison with 72 and 47% in the original forecast. So the adjustment is not huge. And also in the South Asia, the original forecast and the updated forecast, as you can see, there are some upward adjustments, but the adjustment again is not that great, which indicate our original forecasts were pretty accurate. And also the Southeast Asia. So the Southeast Asia, the adjustment is also upward adjustment. Again, the adjustment is quite small, only about 1% on average for all scenarios. And also the West Asia, there's some upward adjustment. And this time the adjustment is relatively large, but still it's under 6% for all scenarios. So you can see, so the original forecasts were quite good, quite reliable. And in terms of Pacific, there's some upward adjustment, but it's around 2 to 3% adjustment. Again, reasonable in terms of our original forecast. And now I'm going to use some countries to illustrate the scenario forecast and adjustments we made in this update. For China, so we made some upward adjustment. It's between actually 7 to 8%. I think this is because China has controlled the pandemic situation very well and quite consistent over the past year. So there's some upward movement in terms of arrivals into China. So this is why the adjustment is perhaps a relatively bigger in comparison with other destinations. In terms of Hong Kong SAR, and we also made some adjustment, mainly upward adjustment. So and this is again because Hong Kong also has controlled the situation, pandemic situation well. So there's some increase in terms of inward tourist arrivals into Hong Kong from different source market. Thailand, there's no adjustment, no change basically, which means probably our initial forecast still pretty acceptable, pretty accurate. In terms of USA, we make some upward adjustment around 2 to 3%, and that was because the COVID-19 situation has been controlled due to the successful vaccine program after January 2021. So in conclusion, I would like to make the following comments based on our adjusted or updated forecast. For the updated forecast, actually, PATA is going to publish the update within the next few weeks, and you will be able to access those detailed country by country update very soon. So if you are interested, you can contact PATA for the more detailed update of our forecast. In general, among the 6 regions, Pacific region is expected to have the highest recovery rate in the mid and also medium, mild and medium scenarios. The recovery rate in comparison with 2019 will be 104% and 79.5% in terms of recovery in different scenarios. And this is because a few cases were identified or confirmed in the Pacific region, and also the key source markets actually are from Australia and New Zealand, where the COVID-19 was pretty much controlled. So there's a travel bubble between Australia and New Zealand. So that's why you can see the recovery in this region is much better than other regions. In terms of Americas, so America are likely to recover well also because of the successful vaccine program, which I mentioned earlier. And also there's less restrictions in terms of traveling to and from the United States and Canada. Destinations in Northeast Asia will see steady recovery, also because of a COVID-19 pandemic is well controlled, and also potential relaxation of travel restrictions among different countries and regions. I know Hong Kong, Singapore, and also China, I think including Japan and South Korea, in discussion with a number of source markets in terms of opening up their borders and establish travel bubbles. So this actually further encourage the recovery of tourism in the future. And also India is quite interesting. Actually, when we produced our original forecast, we didn't know India will have another wave of COVID-19 pandemic in April. So this actually posed a very big challenge to the region in general and to certain countries as well in terms of the negative influence of tourism recovery in this country and regions. But of course, these forecasts are only up to date in consideration of the information available up to now. So we will make further adjustment in 2 or 3 months' time based on the latest assessment of the COVID-19 situation in different destinations and different regions, especially when the COVID-19 vaccine program has been carried out in a number of countries within Asia Pacific, which will certainly have a positive influence on the tourism demand in these countries and regions. So stay tuned for the next update in 2 or 3 months' time. And that's all I have to say. We'll be happy to answer any questions. So,
thank you very much, Professor Song.
So back to Paul.
Yes, we'll come back to Professor Song later in the panel discussion, but feel free to keep submitting your questions in the Q&A. Professor Song or his colleague will be able to answer them as we move along. Next, I'll just get my screen real quick here. Next with us, we have from Uriarte International. She's the head of travel research and a good friend of PADA. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Caroline Bremner. Caroline?
Hi, Paul. It's great to be with you all today. I'm sitting in the lovely Highlands of Scotland, so I hope everybody is doing well. Let me just share my screen, and then I can present the latest view from Euromonitor International on the macroeconomic outlook. So if you could just confirm that you can see my slides.
Yes, perfect.
Great. So yeah, and thank you to Professor Song for the really interesting sort of overview of where we're at on the tourism point of view. And so with Euromonitor, what we'll do is just share the latest macroeconomic view that we have, and then look at some specific countries in detail. And also I'm delighted to as well share some new research that we've published on sustainable travel transformation. So I think this is really also in part important and part of our recovery process. So for those of you who aren't yet familiar with Euromonitor, we're a global market research company. We have thousands of analysts spread across the world and 15 offices that we work with. I've been with the company for 25 years, and obviously we're working hard to keep track of the dynamic changes in the industry that we're seeing. So we've built again some tools that are very helpful to understand the changes that we're seeing at a country level and a destination level. So this is data from our macroeconomic model. It's built by our economist team, and they actually update our information and data on GDP on a monthly basis, according to what's happening and new information that is released. So when we look at the world economy, we can see that the last year in 2020, there was a global recession, unprecedented recession of 3.2%, but that's actually a little bit better than we originally forecast. So, we've knocked 0.6 percentage points off that. And actually overall, we've seen upward adjustments for most of the major economies. So, China grew by 2.2%. The EU saw a very sharp recession, but again, it wasn't as bad as we had originally predicted. So a deep recession in Europe of -6% last year. But I think, and the same in the US, and even in the emerging economies that have been so strong and resilient. But what we are seeing is this expected rebound in 2021. And I must caveat that that's the baseline expectation. And so we expect, say, for the emerging economies that they will rebound by 6.7% in 2021. And that is based on the baseline scenario assumptions that the COVID-19 waves will be contained to 1 or 2 this year, and that the vaccine progress is, very, it rolls out well, and we can get those mass vaccinations rolled out as quickly as possible. But I think it's important to say that, there are other factors at play, as we know. It's not just the speed of the vaccination program, which has been truly impressive, where we already have 9% of the world vaccinated to date. Some countries have really sped ahead, such as Israel, and we know that, for example, in Asia Pacific, it's about 5%. So it's very, very varied. So what we do have at Euromonitor is different scenarios. So just as an example, we're looking at China for real GDP growth. And so, as I mentioned, 2020, we saw growth in China of 2%, which is obviously a slowdown, but still, this is a, really, really good performance. And then in our best case scenario, China will rebound really, really strongly in 2021 by, it could be as high as 9%. But our baseline is that it will be round about sort of 8%. But in a worst case scenario, where there are more consecutive waves of COVID, more variants, the vaccine rollout is hampered and doesn't go as fast as we would hope, then, there's this negative scenario that we have. And in the case of China, that would lead to, growth of 5% in 2021. So you can see that our assumptions take into consideration not just what's happening with the economy, but very importantly with COVID, the cases, the vaccinations, and equally, what's coming down the line with new variants, and when will countries achieve herd immunity. And as we know, it's really not plain sailing. There's a myriad of patchwork regulations and restrictions in place. It's really still not very well coordinated at a global level. So equally, we have developed a global recovery index dashboard. And this is where our economist team has looked at all the main countries around the world in terms of consumer spending, in terms of consumer confidence, retail sales, digital penetration, and those kind of factors. And it is interesting to see that we are seeing Asia Pacific particularly led by China, and then also the Pacific, as Professor Song was saying, sort of moving out of the pandemic faster than other countries and regions. Equally, some areas in Europe, Scandinavia, again, rebounding relatively quickly. But, challenges remain for Latin America, the UK, and Canada. And of course, what we can do is then forecast this. This is Q1, but equally, we can go out to Q2 2022 if anybody would like to see the progression of how we think the world is going to recover. Now, let's just turn and look at some of the countries in detail, or the destinations that PATA work with. This is looking at the economic performance last year compared to the average forecast for 21 to 24. We know that destinations such as Macau, the Maldives, and Fiji were very heavily impacted, the most impacted by COVID-19, particularly where there's this reliance and dependency on international tourism. So of course, with the bans and restrictions, that automatically has a negative impact on the economy, especially if you can't then pivot to a domestic market. But we know that the domestic markets are also shaping up in a better way sometimes than the international markets if the disease has been kept under control. So this is the very latest data from May that our economist team has shared with me. And this is looking at the least impacted destinations around the world. You know, particularly last year, we saw Chinese Taipei, Taiwan, and then, you know, China, Vietnam, all sort of, you know, being the strongest economically. And then also the fact that they were able to recover their supply, you know, their production and you know, manufacturing relatively quickly last year. So we do expect different, you know, performances and rebounds. And, you know, it's very interesting to see what's happening in Australasia with the likes of New Zealand picking up speed because of their good handling of the pandemic. Now, I'd just like to share some really interesting data when it comes to new consumer survey research that we have. So we've talked to 40,000 people in 40 countries, and I've been able to isolate whether those consumers are selecting sustainable travel versus mass market travel options. And it was really interesting to see that, you know, Vietnam, China, India, Thailand, there's such a, you know, a really strong desire, one, to have a positive impact on the environment in these consumers' daily life, but equally that's translating into the travel choices that they make when they're, you know, when they're dreaming and making their travel plans and selecting their travel options. So I think it's very, you know, reassuring that this path to sustainability that we all hope for is actually resonating and is what consumers want. And of course, if anybody would like more detail, they can get in touch with me directly afterwards. And then, you know, we also have this brand new Sustainable Travel Index. Again, we worked in partnership with our analytics team to build an index looking at 7 different sustainability pillars, whether it was environmental sustainability, social, economic, the destination risk, sustainable tourism demand, transport and lodging. And we were, you know, delighted to partner with folks such as the Travel Foundation and Greenview. And I've just pulled together some of the destinations in Asia Pacific. And you can see it's quite a mixed bag. So, you know, we have Australia and New Zealand performing, you know, relatively well in the top 30 of the Sustainable Travel Index. And then on the flip side, we have other countries such as India right at the bottom of the list. But there's various different factors. And we looked at 57 different indicators. So it's not, you know, clear cut. But I did want to pull out some examples. So the fact that, you know, we have Hong Kong, we have Australia, we have Malaysia, all doing very well for sustainable economic sustainability, where they have like a good balance in their economies and how they, you know, the penetration of hospitality and tourism. And then also we have very strong performances for sustainable tourism demand by the likes of Australia and New Zealand, where they have a, you know, they are driving the average spend per trip, they are minimizing the amount of leakage there is, and they also have a very vibrant and strong domestic economy. So even though some of these countries still remain under wraps and with travel bubbles such as between Australia and New Zealand, we can see that, you know, that domestic component is also very important for potential recovery. So just to summarize, we can see that the vaccination progress is really like a game changer for the speed that we're seeing some countries recover. However, it's not plain sailing. It's a bit of a patchwork and mishmash of you know, who's doing well and who's going fast and first, and then also the fact that we need to make sure the vaccine is shared, especially amongst the emerging and developing countries. We also are expecting a staycation boom this year in 2021 because of these remaining travel bans and restrictions. And of course, we've got the start of the green light systems that we're seeing in Europe. But again, sometimes it doesn't make much sense. So the UK has 12 countries on the green list. It's whether those countries will also accept UK visitors. So again, there needs to be more coordination. What we're seeing from Asia, the region is resilient. It is moving out of the crisis well, and we can see that it will continue to be a very, a strong source of growth and demand. And we need to make sure that that is in a sustainable way. And we can see that consumers really value sustainability, particularly in their travel choices. Also, we have the fact that Australasia is leading the pack in terms of sustainability when we look at those PATA countries. And of course, it's always interesting to hear of best practice. So again, thank you very much for allowing me to share our latest research, and looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. We'll hear back from Caroline when we get to the discussion phase. But with that, let me share my screen. We have our final presentation for the first part of this webinar. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of TCI Research, who will provide information about, travel sentiment. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Olivier Henry-Biabaud. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Yes, hi Paul, hi everyone, it's good to see you again. Let me share my screen. Okay.
Just full screen it. All good.
All good. All right, good morning, good afternoon everyone. So it's a new update on the travel sentiment towards the APAC that I'm delighted to share with you today. Actually, the type of data we are looking at is a bit specific. It's all about e-reputation. So we measure the reputation of countries and travel overall in relation to travel and tourism. And so basically, it's all based on social data from all sort of social conversations shared by online medias or citizens or travelers or past travelers, brands and officials. And all this big noise is analyzed in a way to understand how sentiment is going up or down depending on the period and depending on the region. So of course, sentiment is never completely predictive of bookings, but it's a very essential component of booking, because we all know, and it's been repeated over time, but consumers are going to choose the destination they are allowed to go, of course, but also the destination they trust. So it's kind of interesting data to track. Starting with the big picture. So last time we ended up at the end of the year 2020, and many things have been developed since then. So what you see, the trend lines you are seeing on the screen are showing the polarity and tonality of conversations between positive and negative stories and conversations about the average countries of each region in relation to travel and tourism. So what we can see there is, fortunately, year to date, we are almost in all regions, including Asia Pacific, way above the level of negativity we had when the crisis started a bit more than a year and a half ago. And so that's a good thing. But what's been happening since the beginning of the year is very clear evidence that the new variants have really increased concerns in many places and really impacted a lot of regions, particularly the Americas, of course, but also Europe with the UK variant, Africa with the South African variant. And it seems that so far, Asia have been relatively preserved, or let's say set a bit apart from the new variants developments in negative in social conversations, whereas it was really not the case in many other places. Having said that, it seems that year to date, and that's the new element since last time, we are seeing a bit of erosion, slow erosions about Asia. Still scores are positive, but particularly in the past weeks, the dynamic of the rebound in terms of e-reputation seems to be a bit more favorable for Europe compared to Asia Pacific. And I will explain why in a minute, looking at the drivers of those sentiments. So we have a sort of a shift in the recent weeks that are, let's say, when we have from other consumer surveys we're doing, we see that Asia seems to be really challenged again by many other regions, and particularly Europe. On the other way around, looking at the positive note, we see that in Europe as a market, outbound market, conversations over there about Asia seems to be quite very positive. So there is a sort of a growing interest from Europe to consider Asia, whereas long haul markets would maybe also consider Europe on top of mind, including in China, for example. When we ask Chinese where they want to travel this year, we have still Europe very top of mind, even higher than across Asia. One of the, let's say, positive news also is North Americans' image and reputation as it is spread over there about Asia is kind of below the average markets. But compared to the past version of this analysis, we are seeing an increase of 22, I guess, points up in this market. So the situation over there is also improving for Asia. Still, we are seeing that erosion. In terms of individual e-reputation, if we consolidate the past 6 months, balance of polarity for conversations on those destinations, we see there again 3, let's say, groups, just to simplify. One is a group of destinations that have been so far relatively really preserved, and basically they have in e-reputation and the blogospheres and so on, they have some sort of a kind of competitive advantage. We see Maldives there, we see Vietnam or Cambodia or Macau and Thailand. So strong, let's say, brand in terms of e-reputation. We have a group of countries where the reputation there have been relatively preserved, so they have high scores as well, and they have been sometimes under the spot, but now in terms of consolidation, we see they have been relatively preserved. We have big names there, Japan, we have Singapore. Singapore, it's a bit tricky now because of the latest development, but somehow in, let's say, consolidating the past 6 months, it's still high. We have Turkey, New Zealand, and then there's a group of brands, or let's say destination or countries in relation to travel and tourism, conversations which have been a bit more, let's say, exposed in conversations, and 2 subgroups there. One, a group of country, India and Myanmar, which currently are suffering quite a lot in terms of e-reputation. India for, of course, the very sad new wave that seems to be discussed on social conversations as a bit under or not under control, and Myanmar for the reason that we can imagine. China is very interesting because if China today is maybe doesn't have some sort of a huge competitive advantage compared to other destinations, it's by far the country where the rebound has been the most significant. And you see in the past 12 months, and a bit more now, that past 12 months, the rebound of net sentiment score for China is really picking up. Now it's in positive. We believe it's here to stay and to continue. So China in this competitive scope is really looking at or showing the best or the fastest rebound or the highest rebound by far compared to when the crisis started. I was mentioning Singapore. I just made a quick test of how Singapore has been discussing in the past days, and as you can see, this is very volatile because we see a lot of negative conversations fueling, the social waves in the past days because of these new, cases there, context about lockdowns and so on. So this is quite volatile. Now, looking at what is driving sentiment of Asia in positive and a bit of vigilance points as well. So in positive, we find again a lot of great combinations of positive reputation drivers. Many are linked to the beaches and the beautiful beaches, but also conversations about Asia pointed out as an affordable destination to travel to, which is good because we know that there's about a half of consumers today which say they are in uncertain situation in terms of spending power, or even 8% of them are somehow in difficult times. So it's quite important to be perceived as an affordable destination to travel to. Asia continue to inspire people across the world, including for some social lifestyle. So a country where post-COVID slow life can be enjoyed. A lot of positive conversations about connections between Asia and European countries. Many good narratives about friendships that has been developed and shared related to Asia. Of course, food and gastronomy have always been a major driver of a good reputation and still is in the past months. Some destinations manage to be to promote vaccination trips open to visitor. Interesting conversations about cruise resuming in Asia. The perception that Asia is not only one big place, but also a combination of very, very local traditions, a lot of diversity across the continent. Many conversations about the natural wonders, and that has to be linked to the rise of sustainability interest and focus from travelers and companies and DMOs. But also interesting growing conversations that, you know, Asia is a nice place, an open place for Muslim communities to celebrate their religion or to go back in families and so on. And also many aspects which sometimes are anecdotal, but driving a lot of interest and positive reputation for Asia. It could be related to specific events or exhibitions, or of course, as always, films and cinema influence that can be also interesting, because we don't talk about COVID, we talk about something which is much more entertaining and keeping the reputation high. In terms of vigilance points, unsurprisingly, COVID is still there, of course, populating a third of conversations overall. And particularly, and that explains part of the reason why the trend line is a bit down in the past weeks. India being a bit under a very difficult times there, but also some, just like in other regions in the world, a bit of a social or political instability or tensions between Asia and some other regions. And we had that discussions with some of you in the past, but this growing, it's a bit more mediatic kind of things, but still conversations about Asia are, you know, putting some focus on some sort of anti-Asians resentment or concerns here and there on the globe, and some, as it was said last time, particularly concerns from Chinese travelers. When they will travel, they will want to make sure that they will be welcome in a friendly way by local communities, and a bit also of issues around animal welfare, which has to be related to the sensitivity about sustainability, natural environment protections, and so on. So again, the good thing in terms of Asia keeping, despite the low erosion, but the good thing is keeping the sentiment high is always a combination of organic sentiment from, just as an example, this French family sharing about an amazing road trip in Australia, but also pushed by DMOs such as Maldives, having great success in you know, providing good opening attitudes, offering holidaymakers vaccine tourism, gastronomy, also the classic exposure to the media in terms of being part of the best for this, best for that, top, and all these contests and ranking published. And also, interestingly, Asia is always part of discussions from sometimes celebrities. We've just mentioned this rise of or peak of conversations about the Duke of Edinburgh, Edinburgh, yes, which who shared through reports past great experiences that combines Asian destinations with you know, nature and fauna and so on, but also the private sector doing a lot of efforts to be on the list and to provide excellent sentiment towards Asia. So both public and private combining. So there again, the conclusion is the pent-up demand is still very high. We know that the destination choice is still extremely open, and compared to last time, while travelers are planning now more and more let's say overseas and long haul possible trip, Asia is back on the global competition. And so there is a bit of challenge, and particularly against Europe, which is growing more and more in social conversation. But the race is obviously still beginning. So that's it for me. Happy to take your question.
Well, thank you very much, Olivier. You got to stay here because we're actually going to move into the panel discussion. And with that, please welcome our moderator for this session, PATA CEO, Dr. Mario Hardy. And I'll pass it over to Mario to introduce your panelists.
Thank you, Paul. Professor Song, Dr. Yu, Caroline, and of course, my dear friend Olivier. Welcome to this panel discussion. Now, I'm going to ask you one question. I want each one of you to answer or to give me your point of view. And it's a question that I actually have seen repeatedly appearing in the Q&A before from many people. Now, I know this may be a little bit tricky for you to answer, but I'd love to get your opinion. So based on all the various presentations that we just received from Professor Song, Caroline, and of course, Olivier, what is, in your opinion, the most likely scenario based on what was presented initially? The most severe scenario, the mild scenario, or the best case scenario for 2021 and 2022? Professor Song, I see you smiling, so you better start. Your microphone is off. Yeah.
Okay, I was put on the spot. Yeah, actually, personally, I'm optimistic about the future, about the recovery. Actually, I will still believe the medium scenario, which we presented in our forecast, is the most likely scenario. So I think most of the destinations within Asia Pacific will start to recover by the end of this year, and then gradually opening up in 2020. So that's my 2 cents.
Good, Caroline.
Well, I really trust the economist team at Euromonitor because they're the ones that are doing the sort of due diligence and comparing and contrasting versus our peers, and that then informs our tourism model. So I've tended to see that the baseline has been where we've tended to stick with the baseline and adapt to the situation. I don't think it's going to be the optimistic scenario, but I would say, as I mentioned, it's a sort of everybody's diverging and coming out of the crisis at different speeds, and there's a myriad of factors, but it is about getting the virus under control, and then also building that trust when opening up. And vaccination is one part of that, but it's also about making sure that, equally the local population and residents are happy about opening up and it's all done in a safe and there's all the protocols. So for me, I would stick with the baseline for most countries, but as we can see, things can change quite dramatically, as we've, witnessed with India, which is, really tragic. But then, as we're doing at Euromonitor, we have to then use our tools to say, well, this is now what's happening in India. We've gone to the pessimistic 1 or 2 scenario because things have changed so quickly and so dramatically.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember with this crisis is it's the recovery is uneven. Some countries will perform far better than others, but as an aggregate, which is what we're presenting today, that's actually we're estimating at the moment. But I'll come back and challenge the two of you on your answers. Olivier, your views.
Yes, it's hard to forget your personal mind when you have to answer that, because if you are optimistic, you would go for the optimistic scenario. But still, looking at data, the consumer data from social data, but also from all these consumer sentiment surveys that are rolling out here and there, and we are just completing a major 20 markets understanding about the sentiment and travelers planning. And to me, I will stick on the optimistic scenario, because the problem we see is really so not a problem of demand. the demand about traveling has never been so high since we have been measuring that in our consumer surveys. So as soon as people want to travel, as soon as it will be possible again, they will do. The focus now is living the full experience, of course, in safe conditions, but it's less and less about safety. Of course, this will be maybe impacted again if we are seeing new variants and so on. So the problem is a sanitary problem, but it's not a demand problem. So this in mind, if conditions are back, demand is there. So the rebound can be accelerating quite fast based on that. And the second aspect is the demand going to fuel Asia more than Europe or the US or the regions? This is where the battle of competitiveness is back on track. And so far, I think Asia have been relatively, is still keeping, a high level of sentiment and good reputation. In a short to mid-term scenario, maybe Europe is again, quite nice competition of Asia. So it's going to be a matter of travel corridors and who is going to open when and this level of trust and welcome and so on. So I would stick to the optimistic because the demand is there, and the problem is not a problem of demand, but more a problem of opening corridors.
I would support your views on the sentiment. I dream to travel, but I just wish my dream would become reality sooner than later. So I'm tired of dreaming. I want to travel. And I'm sure it's the same for many people. I want to come back to all three of you very briefly on your response. All three of you have actually presented a relatively optimistic point of view moving forward. But I'd like to challenge that response slightly in a comparison between what I would say the West and the East. I know it's quite provocative, but it appears to me from where I sit that actually the West, or mostly Europe, has maybe done better in recent months in terms of gradually managing the current situation with progressively talking about reopening, green certificates within Europe, borders reopening for the summer for travel within Europe. These are, to me, from where I sit in Asia, here in Thailand, are only dreams at the moment. Our borders are closed. For most countries here in Asia, borders are tightly closed. You can't travel. You can only travel domestically. So I would certainly hope that your optimistic view is in relation to 2022. I would certainly support it. I would maybe like to challenge it a little bit in terms of 2021, based on the current past week situation in Singapore, Thailand, which has been, cases are increasing at a phenomenal rate, and of course, Chinese Taipei and a few other destinations. So I'd like to go back to each one of you very, very brief, with a brief answer, because I know we have a few more to cover. Professor Song.
Yeah, actually, there's a question in the Q&A panel precisely related to your question. Is Asian countries seems to manage the pandemic very well at the beginning and also along the way, but the borders are still closed, where the Western countries in Europe and Americas, although they did not manage the situation well at the beginning, but then they started to open up with the introduction of new vaccines, the vaccine programs. And this perhaps is due to the cultural constraints. In Asian countries, I think people tend to be, or even the government tend to be more conservative in opening up. But this actually, in my view, is not necessarily a bad thing, because if you continue make effort in control the pandemic and slowly opening up, although the opening up is slow, but in the long run, this actually will benefit the overall tourism in the region and also in the world. You don't have to go through this cycle, opening up and the lockdown cycle. I think this, although it is slow, but in the long run, I think this probably makes sense.
Caroline.
Well, I would say, we're not out of the woods yet in Europe, and we're still a long way to go. And when you look at the recovery of tourism in Europe, we're looking at, several years to recover. So, I would say as well, there are some positive signs. There is coordination on the vaccination program now. Well, I'm in the UK, it's slightly different in Europe, but we are seeing, I was looking at the numbers for Italy, and they've really ramped up their rollout in the past few weeks. So it's also about, the sort of mobilizing that. And again, it's kind of outside the control of tourism, the Minister of Tourism, isn't it? So it's having that coordinated response between health and tourism and the economy, and also making sure that, that as Olivier was saying about having the safe corridors, the travel bubbles set up. But equally, it has to make sense. And as I mentioned, we can travel from the UK to Portugal, Iceland, Australia, New Zealand, but many of these, well, Australia is going to be closed until next year. So what is the point of us having a green light for Australia when we can't get in? So it has to make sense. And I don't see, sometimes it's very hard, and we're in the industry, but how is that going to make sense for travelers themselves to understand what they can and cannot do?
Thank you. Olivier.
I will share the same sentiment. I mean, probably, of course, 2020. We are talking 2022. I think 2021 is already not behind us, but almost. I mean, in terms of planning, we all know that from, let's say, long haul travel. No doubt about that. And what you say, Mario, is definitely correlating all the data we have. We see basically consumers need to fuel trust. You need clarity of the rules. So they are ready to travel. They want to travel. But they want to make sure that if they go, they will be able to come back and not get quarantined, and things like rules are not going to change, whereas they are traveling within Europe or vice versa, Europe within Asia. So the question of simple, basic rules that apply, which are stable, is very important in fueling that. And exactly as you say, what we see in the last weeks, independently from all the virus picking up again and all these stuff, which are of course very important for travelers, but it's more about the rules. And Europe has been quite late in implementing these now about to be launched European sanitary passports. But as soon as, for example, this will be made available for Chinese, it is possible that Chinese will choose Europe before choosing other Asian destinations first, because the rules will be clear for them. And so, so in a midterm, it is possible, as I said in my presentation, that Europe may be a bit more competitive than some other Asian destinations, including for Asian travelers. So that question of clarity is really essential. And in that game, whereas there are many people complaining about European, consistency and political agreement, things are getting back on track. And on the global scene, it may be a bit less, let's say, in favor of Asia compared to Europe, for example.
We only have about 2 minutes left, so I have a quick question for you, Olivier, and then I'll come back to Caroline with a follow-up question. Olivier, in some of the slides and presentations you shared with us earlier, when you talk about sentiment analysis and the desire to travel, and you see pickup in many places around the world, I just want to clarify for the audience, you don't actually make any difference in your research as a desire to travel domestically as opposed to internationally. It is just a desire to travel, correct?
Well, it depends. It depends on what we measure. We track both, of course, because there's a growing, not growing, but there's an immediate short-term need to attract domestic visitors. But in this case, what I presented before is looking at the international reputation. There are a few mentions around U.S. Asia reputation in the U.S., in Europe, and so on. So it's really focused on international that we look at right now in those sentiment data, because it's It's the whole for any region, international travelers tend to they tend to spend more than average domestic visitors. So the focus is still very much there.
Good. Thank you, Olivier. One last question for you, Caroline. And in a recent webinar I presented or attended with the World Bank, IMF, and a few other organizations, it was actually mentioned as a way forward that destinations or countries around the world who are heavily reliant on tourism as GDP contributions should start looking at diversifying their incomes to other activities moving forward. Now, I know that we're in a tourism webinar today, and that's probably what many of the businesses don't want to hear, but there is a push amongst the international organization to encourage economies to diversify moving forward. And you've kind of alluded a little bit about this in your presentation earlier when you presented how the GDP contributions is changing between countries moving forward. I'd just like to get your perspective on that comment from the international organizations.
I think it's also dependent on, what's coming down the pipeline. And if we look at climate change, that's going to be the next big crisis. So, diversifying in the face of climate change away from tourism, are we going to be any better off? So I guess that's one answer. But the other is that everything, and we know this, everything is better in balance, and that we shouldn't be overly exposed. So every country has to look at where are they, where are the risks, and where could they be potentially, open to further disruption down the line. I don't believe that. And we see that tourism is so important for so many countries around the world, and sometimes is the only, generator of revenue and jobs and creating equality and diversity. So I don't feel we should say, right, tourism is bad. I think we just need to put it in context, look at it all holistically, and make sure that we, one, maximize the benefits, minimize the negatives, and equally just make sure that we are looking further down the line to the climate emergency, which we know is going to have fundamental impacts on all our lives, particularly for smaller, more vulnerable destinations at the front line. So I wouldn't like to see a knee-jerk reaction away from tourism.
Thank you, Caroline. Lastly, just to conclude, I'd like to give the voice to Dr. Liu, because you and your team are the one who crunched all the numbers and worked really hard to put the research together, and give you the last word and opportunity to comment on my first questions I asked about the likelihood of the scenarios moving forward. So Dr. Liu, you have the closing statement.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. I think I agree with Prof. Song and Caroline that I think the most likely situation is still the medium case. And as Prof. Song just introduced, our latest updates of the forecast in this round is quite, we say we don't have much adjustment compared to the first round. And this is also means that our latest forecast is still in line with the forecast generated by UNWTO and also other international institutions. So we believe that, at least from my personal perspective, the medium situation is still the one which will most likely to happen. But of course, we will put an eye on the latest development of the pandemic and also the vaccine campaign in the world, and to update forecast on time.
Thank you. Dr. Liu, Professor Song, Caroline, Olivier, thank you very much for your contribution today. I know there are still a few remaining questions in the Q&A, so you can maybe each one of you review if you wish to answer, and I'll pass the microphone back to Paul. Thank you very much, everyone. I will see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you, Caroline, Professor Song, Olivier, and Dr. Liu. Really is a really good comprehensive view of travel sentiment, and sort of the economic situation. We still have 2 more presentations, I think this will be really interesting because we've looked at sort of the comprehensive view that they've provided in the first part. The second part here, we're actually looking at forward-looking data. So we'll look at both aviation and hotels. So let's just get right into it. I don't want to take too long. Our first presenter is the Business Development Manager at Southeast Asia at STR. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Fenady Uriarte. Is that right?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be part of this webinar. So for this session, I'm going to share with you the insights coming from the hospitality industry. So give me, there we go. So obviously our topic is, are we seeing, light at the end of the tunnel? Key questions that we have right now is really, where are we now? So in this instance, for the hospitality industry, we wanted to be able to measure how far we are in terms of recovery. And earlier discussions were talking about recovery and where the demands are coming from. And given the tight situation that we have right now, is what's our window of opportunity? How are we going to capture that opportunity moving forward? So before I drill down to the certain key markets for Asia Pacific, right? So I'm giving you here is a global perspective. Earlier, we've seen from Euromonitor a global perspective in terms of GDP forecast. But what we have here is an actual occupancy globally. So this is based on mid of April data. So what we are seeing here are 4 buckets. So we have the reds, obviously, majority of the markets in mid-April, we're seeing a lot of reds, including key markets in Southeast Asia. Europe is also pretty much red in that bucket. Some markets are going towards the light blue, which is about 50 to 75%. And that's pretty much evident towards the North Asia, especially China, Australia, and also New Zealand. We are not seeing any green shoots as of this moment, as of the April data, pretty much so because we're still impacted by the pandemic situation. So before I move to deep dive into key markets, what we're going to see here would be Asia Pacific occupancy movement. So there are 3 points that I will show to you. So this is really an eyeball, really, are we going to see some occupancy movement? So if I would take from that week of December 26th, so we got some little green shoots over there coming from the China market, and majority of the reds, it's Southeast Asia and also South Asia. Towards by the end of February, still pretty much not really moving towards the green shoots because we're looking at recovery. We're trying to see if there's any recovery in some markets. But as you can see, more on the reds because of some markets, for example, Japan, were in kind of a state of emergency situation. So another point, which is mid of April, we're seeing a little bit of green shoots and coming from China, coming from Australia. So that's really good in terms of looking into the movement of occupancy, because occupancy means, there is demand in the market, but still, it's an eyeball in terms of occupancy. You see those reds, and those reds still remains those markets which is in critical levels, which is about 25%. Now, here we're going to look at some bigger markets in Asia Pacific. So we're looking at Australia, China, India, and also Japan. This will be the movement of occupancy levels from January all the way to about mid of April. So this is Australia. As I mentioned earlier, Australia is looking at that, some green shoots. And all these spikes also represents the spikes on weekends. So there is a demand for weekend market for the Australia. And then this is for China. Interestingly, if we would compare that between Australia and China, China has got more upshoots in terms of occupancy. As you can see, it moves, it's a bit wider in terms, it's not just a spike, it's a bit wider. So that means the occupancy levels are also high around mid week of for the last 4 months. Now, this is India. Yes, we saw some upshoot in terms of occupancy levels towards February, but by April, then of course we see that downward slide. And of course, what we're going to expect, of course, is the situation, the unfortunate situation that they have right now. So we don't expect that they will be able to recover as quickly as anticipated. Now, this will be for Japan. So again, an occupancy movement of Japan from January. We see also some upshoots going upward trend towards March, but then it also goes down to April. Japan basically has had, consistent in and out state of emergency. And that's also very tricky because, Olympics is coming very, very soon. So they have that pressure of, keeping up into the demand, but then whether it's happening or not. Now let's go back to Australia. So here, if we slice and dice accordingly to Sydney and against Melbourne, it's a good indicator here in terms of occupancy. Regional travel, domestic travel is really pushing, and also that confidence pushing the occupancy levels. And as we have seen in the Easter holiday, one of the highest occupancy levels recorded for the last 4 months. Now, with SER, what we do is we also collect data, and what we have here is a data on forward occupancy. What is business on the books? So very interestingly, for Melbourne and Sydney, we don't really see that much of a high occupancy levels. So the base is still not there. So there is a confidence in terms of travel, yes, on weekends. But if we would look into June, yes, there's a little bit of spikes there towards the weekend of June 11, but it doesn't really give us a lot of base in terms of occupancy for Melbourne and Sydney, even up to the first week of August. So what we're looking at is, it's not a projection, this is actual collected occupancies for these two markets. Now, let's move a little bit closer to the North Asia. So we will have a comparison between China and also Japan. So for a snippet in terms of understanding, how good is the business or how is China performing? I'm just giving you 3 markets here: Shanghai, Beijing, and Sanya. Sanya has pretty much, it's that little island in the Pacific, obviously, but Sanya has been the only market that has a positive RevPAR recorded in 2020. And that has continued towards the first quarter of the year. If we would compare that between, key cities like Shanghai and Beijing, yes, they're also reaching into a high level occupancy, a little dip there towards the first week of April. But Sanya being a destination, people are cooped up, they wanted to travel, they cannot travel, the Chinese cannot travel. So Sanya is the way to go. And that's why we are, if we would compare, that is the highest performing markets in China. Now with the token and the Olympics, as I have mentioned, so this is, a comparison between Hokkaido, Kyoto, Okinawa, and Tokyo, obviously. All those upshoots, yes, going towards to April, that's a good indicator for Japan market, some, especially on the weekends. But like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of, they have been bitten by the state of emergency. So that's why we're seeing some downward trends as well towards April. Now, of course, with the Olympics, that continues to add pressure. I mean, we'll never know whether it's going to happen, and then hopefully it will, but of course it has to be safe and with the proper mandate of the government. So we'll have to see how it fares for the Japan market, because they don't want to cancel. There's so much at stake in terms of the business in Tokyo especially. Now, let's just compare to Southeast Asian markets. We would always hear a comparison between 2020 and 2021. But you know, part of the beauty of benchmarking, especially for the hospitality industries, we really want to understand where we are. So right now, we will have a comparison between two time frames, which is in 2019 and 2021. Mainly because we want to forget about 2020. 2020 is not really such a good year. We want to forget about that. So let's compare 2 points. March alone, from March 2021 against 2019. So this is a growth comparison in terms of occupancy. As you can see here, we got Singapore, Metro Manila, and Jakarta, which would have the least losses, or as compared to Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, and Ho Chi Minh. Bangkok has always been like, and also Ho Chi Minh, especially the Vietnam markets, has been really performing quite well in 2019. So hence, if we would compare that to this year's performance in terms of occupancy, we really see a downward slide there. So Bangkok, you're pretty much moving towards almost 70% down growth. Now, talking further into Bangkok occupancies and expectation. So this is a almost a 5 months performance in occupancy. It's not exceeding in terms of 35%. So that is a bit tricky for the Bangkok market. And then towards a little bit in Songkran, we saw some upshoots in Songkran, and then downward slide because of the cases are also rising in Bangkok. So we see that downward trend, an immediate effect in the market. So, but we are also looking, we just launched the Forward Star for Bangkok. And this is what we have seen. So this is an occupancy level. So right after like first week of May, we saw that occupancy is about 15-17%. And then when we would look into what is on the books, the occupancy on the books for the Bangkok market, it's really not a pretty picture as well. It's not so much moving. It's barely picking up week on week. We've been also looking into the pickup for the Bangkok market. It's not really picking up. There's no notable pickup. Occupancy level is still way below 15%, and a single-digit occupancy up to first week of August. So like I said earlier, it's really not a notable pickup for the Bangkok market. As you can see here, yes, up to about first week of June, about 1.8, 1% to 2% growth in terms of pickup compared to the previous week, but then it's really going down on a downward trend towards the end of July. Now, Singapore, we've been hit with the some rising cases. So just over the weekend, if you have seen that in the news, earlier discussion about Singapore in terms of e-reputation is in there because of the rising cases, obviously, and the heightened restrictions. But if we could look into the performance all the way from January to first week of May, occupancy is pretty much high. There is a reason for this, even if there are border closures in some other markets. This is mainly attributed to the quarantine hotels. There are a little bit of staycation that happened, but it's also quite volatile because of the recent restriction. Then we saw some cancellations, etc. But this is more on the demand being fueled because the hotels, a lot of hotels has been taken and used as a quarantine hotel or SHN facility. Now let's look into Singapore's forward-looking data as well. Occupancy again reaches up to about over 50-60% over the 21st of May. It's a downward trend, but this is obviously in terms of occupancy. So whenever there's a huge demand in terms of for SHN, then we'll probably see a lot more bookings. Now let's look at Maldives. Everybody wants to travel. Now, the good thing with Maldives is that it continues to be a hassle-free destination. Maldives has positioned itself as, they're open. all you need to have is that certificate PCR test, and then you'll be able to travel to Maldives. And also the allure of Maldives is that they have different atolls, they have different islands. So that also gives them, that flexibility of, if you want to do quarantine, you can do so. And quite interesting, that's even an answer to, India. So the Indian market is one of the highest source market recorded for 2021. In fact, towards the end of Q4, towards to Q1 of this year, Maldives has recorded about 23% share by Indian tourists. So with the situation right now in India, we don't know for sure how it's going to affect. But what we have seen is that they remain above 40% occupancy on high, even during up to the first quarter, up to end of March, we really see that high occupancy going up to about 70%. But let's look at how the occupancy levels are. What is the occupancy on the books? Up to about first week of August, the Maldives market really has recorded a good fair share. So about 20 to 25% has been already in the book. So that is a good indicator for them. They have positioned themselves as, you can do quarantine, especially if you're coming from India. They didn't really close their borders for India. So you can go there, but if you're coming from India, going to Maldives, you can do your quarantine in the islands. You're just not allowed to go to the main island, which is Malay. But generally, as Maldives, attracting Indian, but also Russian markets, also has grown in that share. So over 20% occupancy in the books is a good base, given that, since if we look at from the first quarter, from January, they really have a good demand for their hotels and also their resorts. Now, it's about what's up ahead for us. Are we, looking at the greener pastures when we move towards that window? We need to understand volatility. For in the hospitality industry, it's so much risk right now, because obviously we're one of the industry that has been badly hit. So we need to understand volatility and travel confidence, and that's really the conversations that we have this afternoon. My key takeaway is that if you would need to understand this volatility and travel confidence, always look at the data. Webinars like this that PATA has organized, these are really going to give you a lot of insights in order to navigate the tricky part of 2021. Even if we're not there, we haven't finished there the year, but we need to plan ahead up to 2022 or even 2023. For STR, we do have some publications, our blogs. If you want to read on that, some very updated and information, just go to the website and you'll be able to read up on very interesting insights in some key markets globally. Thank you very much and stay safe. If you have any question, let me know. Over to you, Paul. You're on mute.
Rookie mistake, rookie Zoom mistake. Probably the most commonly used phrase over the past year and a half, right? You're still on mute.
You're on mute.
Well, thank you very much, Fenady. We should be back with us for the discussion. But if you have any questions, feel free to remember to put it into the Q&A. So with that, we have our last presenter, last but certainly not least. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our good friend. He's the APAC Director and Divisional Director of Hospitality at Forward Keys. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jameson Wong. Jameson.
Thanks, Paul. You didn't mess up my last name. Let me just share my screen.
Let me stop mine.
Okay, all good? Screen's working?
Good. Yes.
Okay, so good day, everybody. My name is Jameson, and today I would be sharing 4 broad topics with you. First of all, wanted to do a quick review of what has happened year to date. Wanted to also look at some of the destinations that have opened up. Thirdly, learning from some of the APEC bubbles that we have seen so far. And the last point, what can we expect in the next few months? But first of all, a few quick words about our company Forward Keys and the data that we'll be using in today's presentation. We are a B2B travel analytics company specializing in air travel. We use big data to help our customers understand travel demand and trends in real time. Important to note that in today's presentation, the key data set that we are using is actually called actual air tickets, and this data set combines global air tickets issued through travel agencies as well as airlines to provide us with a factual view on the state of air travel. So starting off, a review on international travel. In terms of international travel year to date, the overall picture for the first 4 months shows a slight reactivation in the travel sector. However, as you can see, overall, we are still minus 86% as compared to 2019's level. Not surprisingly as well, the Asia Pacific region remains the most affected, and we are still minus 95% versus 2019's level. The best performing one, America's minus 75%. Looking at it through a different lens, if you see the volume of tickets being sold year to date for travel anytime in the future, we still see a similar difference in terms of performance of the different worldwide regions when compared to 2019's level. The Caribbean has almost essentially reached and slightly surpassed a little bit of 2019 as of the end of April. And together with the reactivation of US travel, this is going to rapidly improve the overall America's outlook for summer. As you can see, ticketing performance for Europe as well as Asia Pacific, the last 2 lines down at the bottom, remains lagging behind the worldwide performance. So quite frankly, in APEC, whatever remains of travel is largely concentrated around domestic tourism. If we look at tickets issued for domestic travel in APEC, Vietnam has the best performance year to date. Thanks to low transmission rates as well as proactive government campaigns, domestic travel in Vietnam actually reached 132% of 2019's level. China is the next best performing, with domestic travel recovering to about 86% of 2019. South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia recovered to approximately 70%, with the rest of the Southeast Asian countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia recovering to only about 20%. So that's on the domestic front. Now, shifting back to international travel, there has been one clear winner, which Fenady mentioned earlier, and it's essentially Maldives, right? However, when we look at technically international arrivals across the APEC region, 3 stand out: Maldives, Bangladesh, as well as Macau. Bangladesh is largely due to returning workers, and Macau, pretty much domestic Chinese travel. So again, Maldives is frankly the only destination receiving international leisure travel, and they have basically recovered to about 51% of 2019's level. And on this note, I wanted us to start looking at the reopening of destinations, starting off with the Maldives. Now, if you look at the past 12 months, in July, Maldives announced that their borders would be reopened to international travelers, and we started seeing the first travelers coming in from the UAE because on the source market side, they have also started to ease returning quarantine conditions. Subsequently, once the respective governments of Russia as well as Ukraine lifted international travel bans, we also started to track a recovery of travel from these 2 markets. And yeah, these are the 3 notable source markets in terms of passenger arrivals: Russia, UAE, as well as Ukraine. And one of the two other things that has transpired, right? First of all, Maldives has has been setting itself up as a potential vaccine tourism destination, with the new campaign being the 3 Vs: visit, vaccinate, and vacation. That's provided all residents, all local residents have had their shots. But also we need to be conscious that with the recent developments in India, on May 12th, the government actually decided to temporarily suspend um, uh, tourist visas, issuing tourist visas to the South Asian countries. So that's potentially what is explaining this drop off right towards the end from Russia. Okay. And one of the things that we are also seeing, which shouldn't come as a surprise, is a shift in traveler profile. Just keeping on destination Maldives again, what we are seeing is that premium class travel, economy, business, as well as first class travel, has seen an increase in the first quarter of this year as compared to same time 2019. Whereas tickets for economy has declined by about 9.5%. Looking at the next destination that is, open, Macau, what we call international bookings, is essentially for mainland Chinese travelers, because there is a bilateral agreement for quarantine-free travel. The latest, um, that is not unique to Macau, but just because we're talking about Macau right now, there has been new quarantine measures that has been lengthened, just to kind of address the fact that the new variant seems to be having a longer um, period of incubation. So, if you look at what Macau did in February, when they opened to mainland China, obviously we would see a recovery of Chinese travelers going into Macau, in fact, reaching a level of approximately 66, 60% of 2019's level. The next destination to focus on would basically be Thailand, right? In February, there was the campaign promoting safe and sustainable tourism. In fact, when the announcement was made promoting this campaign, we tracked a week-over-week surge of tickets by about 110%. Following that, towards the end of March, Thailand announced the reopening of Phuket for July. And similarly, we also tracked that there was a surge in tickets being sold by approximately plus 53% week over week. Now, obviously, the caveat over here is that these percentage growths are based off low levels, and as much as they sound impressive, plus 53%, plus 110%, we are pretty much still looking at only a 2%, 3% of 2019's level. Now, despite a new wave of COVID cases that's happening in Thailand right now, the government has confirmed that they are still pressing ahead with opening up. So based on our latest data, future bookings for travel to Thailand, we are seeing that it's still picking up. In fact, we are seeing an improvement in the month of July of about 90% as compared to June, right? However, one of the things that's reflected in this, and also to go back to Mario's question earlier on, when do we see recovery taking place? Most of these bookings are done for the later part of this year, so there's still a little bit of caution. There's still a little bit of a hesitant. As much as the government has announced, okay, 1st of July we are open, most of the bookings that we are seeing coming in for the second half of the year, as of right now, it's basically for December, November and December. Okay. The other example that I wanted to surface is basically the upcoming European summer travel. So one of the things is clear policy communication allows travelers to book. If we look at the year-to-date tickets issued for European destinations, one of the things that we saw was, early in March, Cyprus announced that they are welcoming vaccinated travelers over summer. And then we saw Greece announcing the same, as well as Croatia. And what we then see is, of course, a pickup in bookings. So consumers need to know the direction, they need to know the policy, and it needs to be communicated clearly and early so that they can plan and they can decide and they can book. I mean, yeah. Okay, the third part of today's presentation, looking at travel bubbles. We've had a couple of significant ones, but I'm just only going to highlight two over here. So the first one, the Tasman bubble. Uh, Earlier in April, New Zealand's Prime Minister announced that they want quarantine-free travel. So again, very reactive. However, what we see is also that the balance of bookings, they are very much strongly in the direction of Australia to New Zealand, rather than the other way around, with almost 3 times as much going from from Australia to New Zealand as compared to the other way around. Also because there's obviously way more proportion of New Zealanders in Australia versus the other way. So a lot of these initial travel were, for visiting families that have been separated, and also wanting to enjoy the winter sports holidays, right? During the first quarter of 2021, one of the things that we've also seen is that the volume of flight tickets issued between Australia and New Zealand were just 0.8% of Q1 2019, right? However, the announcement that the quarantine would be lifted triggered a very, very significant jump, as you can see, reaching about 213% of those issued in the equivalent time of 2019. Yep. And again, to kind of confirm the hypothesis that there is a new type of traveler, we are tracking that most of these travelers between both countries, 91% leisure, 9% business. And as you can see, it's the leisure portion that first of all accounts for lion's share of the pie, but also the one that's recovering faster when we compare it with 2019's level. So, the leisure portion, minus 68% versus 2019, as compared to the business profile travelers, minus 75% of 2019. Okay. The next bubble that aged like milk, the one between Hong Kong and Singapore. So looking at the past 12 months, we can see that there were very significant surge whenever the announcements were made. So to kind of echo Olivier's point, it's not so much about the demand that we are worried about. It's really more of are we open? Are we allowed to travel? Right. So 15 November, the first bubble announcement, very quickly, we all know what happened with that. That's why we see these two negative ticks to kind of cancel off the bookings that were made. So in the coming weeks to come, when we kind of update this timeline, we will be seeing the same thing. This last surge in bookings towards the end of April will of course be cancelled off because, as we all know, the bubble has been caught off again. Yep. Okay, the last one, the outlook. Sorry to be the bearer of not so optimistic news, but if we look at the yellow line, first of all, what we're looking at over here is on the book air tickets that has been issued as of the end of April for travel over the next 6 months into APAC. Okay, the blue shaded area tells you the volume, and the yellow line tells you the level compared against 2019. So as you can see, we are hovering around the 6% mark for Q2, and we are looking at about a 9% of 2019's level in Q3. So nothing too exciting, and I don't expect much to change unless we see Now, I don't expect much to change positively unless we see, significant sudden improvements or announcements. Yeah. Now, if you look at which are the more resilient destinations in terms of the forward bookings, Maldives and the French Polynesia, largely because they have more relaxed restrictions. They both opened in July last year. Specifically more for Maldives, we spoke about this earlier. Very strong marketing campaign. Top source markets: Russia, UAE, and the USA. For the French Polynesia, 95% of all these international tickets for arrival in Q2, Q3 are basically from USA and France. For the Philippines, we are seeing that there are three major source markets: Saudi Arabia, USA, as well as the UAE. However, we do believe that these are driven by the Filipinos that are returning home. New Zealand, due to the trans-Tasman bubble, 3/4 of these bookings, of these upcoming bookings, are basically from Australia. Okay, so the key takeaways. I mean, first of all, surprise, APAC is still the most closed. We are at approximately 5% of 2019's level. We also know for a fact that clear policy communication allows consumers to take decisions and to book. Yeah. And that through these bookings, what we are also seeing is that there is, of course, a change in traveler profiles. Two of the most obvious ones are, we saw one, an increase in premium air travel, and number two, a change in booking lead times. Now, just to wrap it all off and just to close it up, again, the data set and the platform used in generating today's insights are from actual air tickets as well as destination gateway. Feel free to reach out to us if you need a copy of this presentation. Thank you. Back to you, Paul. Do I stay here or do I go?
Oh, no, yeah.
I stay here.
Sorry. It was just it took a while for my camera to come back on. Well, thank you very much, Jameson, and I'll welcome back Mario to have a quick panel discussion. No, we're way over time, so maybe we'll just keep maybe 10 minutes. Mario, invite Fenady back as well, and then pass it over to you, Mario.
Thank you, Paul. Yep, Fenady, Jameson, thank you for joining me today. And for the audience, if you have any questions, do put it into the Q&A and we'll try to answer them. Let me first actually start with the same question I asked the previous panelist about your views of what the future is for 2021 and 2022. Optimist, pessimist, or realistic?
Ladies first.
I need to be realistic. Well, the reason is with the rising cases and the government restrictions, it's not something that there was a restriction last year and it's not going to happen. We have seen in Singapore that everything is very fluid and volatile in terms of the movement. So we need to be realistic. If we are looking at certain industries or even like in the hospitality industry, we need to be realistic in our forecasting. We really need to look into the data. Be mindful of all these things that's happening. Look at your source markets, for example. So obviously, as much as I want to be pessimistic, we need to know our risk.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jameson.
Somewhat similar. I'm not too optimistic about it, especially and keeping a very close watch on the Indian variant. It could really throw multiple spanners into the works for us in the region. Initially coming into the year, there was quite a little bit of around, okay, we can open up in the second half of the year. But however, that tone has kind of changed. And again, what we're seeing from our data in terms of forward bookings is that a lot of travel is not really being made for Q3. In fact, it's made for Q4. And as a matter of fact, I just remembered now, I purchased a flight ticket for December just out of pure hope. And obviously I can't do that now, but Yeah, so I don't think we're going to see much action in the region for the short term.
Oh, let's hope you're wrong and you can actually enjoy
Yeah, let's hope.
your trip in
Well,
December.
to quote you, one can dream, right?
Exactly. We're still dreaming. There's a specific question for you, Jameson, in the Q&A, and which is in relation to your data. Do you differentiate leisure versus business in your numbers? And if you do, how do you do it?
Yes, we do. We use certain parameters around it. So, for example, if a booking came in through Amex Corporate Travel, right? If the guy is traveling alone, flying in on a Tuesday and flying out on a Thursday, we assume that this individual is a business traveler. So we apply certain parameters around hard data points to derive these profiles.
So if I just want to go to Singapore for dinner, do you count me as a business traveler, even though I'm there?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you must have a good reason to come in Singapore just for dinner.
Chicken rice? No,
No.
just kidding. On a more serious point or question for Fenady, as you were talking, I saw an article popping up on my screen a few minutes ago that actually indicated that in Thailand, 47% of the hotels only have money for 3 months from today onward, which means that actually if the situation continued to get worse, as it has been in the last few days, potentially 40%, 47% of these hotels will actually be closed by then. Are you, in your numbers, are you monitoring any changes in terms of hotels operations, either permanent close down or temporary close down? Do you have the ability to differentiate while you share your numbers as to which one are still operational?
Yes, we definitely keep track of the closed, whether it's temporary closure or for full closure, because we also need to look at it from a bigger picture. We need to understand the full census of the market. So because we will have a sample in terms of data, but it's not just about those properties receiving report from SDR, but we also need to look at it from a full census. And unfortunately, given the early days of the pandemic, that's already the worry of the hoteliers, the sustainability, how are we going to keep afloat? We have seen measures, obviously, where hotels have decided to do a temporary closure, maybe just scale down in terms of operation. But I mean, our occupancy levels, if we look at it for Thailand, which is about 30% or so, and then from our data of the next 83 days, for example, we're not really seeing a lot of bookings coming in, then it is a tricky situation. It is alarming, but it's not just for Thailand. It's for anyone who's, whether you're a hotel owner or you're operating or managing a hotel. The bottom line is really key to ensuring that you're afloat, and that's where they become creative in making sure that, what part of the expenses that you need to cut down, etc. But it is alarming. I can't say that, we don't have the data that will say, hotels are going to be closed in 3 months, but just the numbers are, it's already alarming. Whether if this goes on and continue, then yeah, we do our own forecast as well, but it is very tricky. And other things that we also have to consider also is not just about those closure, but also those new hotels that are coming in. So we need to look at it from that sense, whereby, for example, you're a hotel in the pipeline and you've already done your construction. How long are you going to stop your construction? You need to make a decision. When am I going to resume? Because the longer that you wait, the wear and tear, etc., all you need to factor in. So it is, we need to be realistic. Going back again to your first question, we need to be realistic and just looking at the numbers. Obviously, if this goes on, the variant, that everyone's been looking at, and making sure that, strict measures are in place, because you cannot just open a market and then you're just opening the floodgates, then it will hurt you in the long run.
Good. And another question specific to your data. Do you have the ability to differentiate between domestic and international, and also which ones are actually used for quarantine. For example, in Thailand, we have ASQ. So many of the hotels, specifically here in Bangkok and a few in Pattaya, are exclusively used for quarantines at the moment.
Well, right now, what we do is when we collect the data, it's just really, we collect the data from the hotels. So if they are quarantine hotels, then we can pretty much see, if they are like constantly 100% or 80%, then we can surmise that they are a quarantine hotel, but I cannot divulge that information because it's an internal individual hotel's data. But we collect whether you are an economy hotel to the luxury hotel, you're a business hotel, service apartment, or even a resort. We do collect that information in general. So we can devise a certain study to understand, how are we going to compare between a quarantine hotel and a non-quarantine hotel versus a service apartment. We can probably explore that and try to discover what's the story in there.
Thank you very much. Just one or two questions for Jameson as we're running out of time. But you've mentioned in one of your charts, you talked about the Maldives and the pickup of travel mostly from Russia and the UAE. What do you attribute, why do you think actually the majority are from these two countries as opposed to maybe others?
Well, largely because there are no returning quarantine conditions. So one of the points that I raised in the presentation was clear policy communication allows people to plan and to decide and subsequently to book. But it's also clear that, I think it was, I remember who was it that mentioned, but it doesn't make sense to add Australia to the UK's green list. It was
Caroline mentioned it.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense to add Australia to UK's green list when you can't travel to Australia, right? And it's the same, for example, in Singapore, where we've had a handful of countries that we unilaterally allowed people to come, but they obviously have not because they can't go back home. So back to your question, why those three countries? Because they can go back home.
Yeah, very, very valid point. I could leave Thailand, but I can't guarantee I can come back home. So yeah. That's a concern at the moment.
We can have many chicken rice over here. You just stuck over here.
Well, actually, as long as it's a vegetarian chicken, I'm okay.
Oh.
I was just kidding. One last point, which is about the bubbles. You've mentioned Australia, New Zealand. So far, so good. Touching wood, things carries on moving forward. But of course, I like the expression you use about Singapore and Hong Kong, which is aged like milk. It keeps changing, being cancelled on and off, and just been actually recently, I think today, announced that it's actually cancelled again or postponed one more time. Well, going back to some of the points that Olivier was mentioning before, I mean, situations like this are not ideal because it actually has an impact on the confidence of the travelers. And if you keep booking a ticket and it gets canceled either before even travel or even worse, get canceled once you're at the destination, it doesn't really help in boosting confidence in people's dream of traveling in the future if those carries on to happen. So I guess it's not necessarily a question, more of a comment about the fact that actually these factors and the fact that things keeps changing all the time makes it really difficult for people not only to plan, but also in regaining their confidence in traveling again. So
yeah, I mean, you've got a point over there. What we see out of both the Trans-Tasman bubble as well as the Hong Kong Singapore bubble, the first week of travel were basically being made up of people who needed to travel, right? People separated from their family. They needed to do a visa run, whatever it is, people who needed to travel, right? And then the later group of travelers were essentially those who wanted to travel. So, using the Hong Kong Singapore example, the second wave, no pun intended, but the second group of travelers that that would have materialized after the first week were those who were trying to catch the June holidays, the June school holidays in Singapore, right? So I would assume that if the first week was fine, and give it a few more weeks into the bubble with some sort of a stability, these leisure group of travelers would be comfortable to travel. I would assume so. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Just a very quick question for you, Fenady. There's one also for Jameson in the Q&A, but I think it's very specific. You can answer maybe separately afterwards. But Fenady, there is a question that just popped up on the screen, in which, does your data include Airbnb and other forms of accommodation like homestay and glamping?
No, unfortunately, no. What we keep track of is like hotels, hotel service apartments and resorts.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Jameson,
much.
as I said, I'll let you answer the other one while Paul does the closing.
Sure.
We just ran out of time. But thank you to both of you
Mario.
sharing your insights, and
Thanks,
really
Mario.
appreciated your partnership and also your insights today. So back to you, Paul. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mario, once again, and of course, thank you, Jameson and Fenady. Really, it's great to actually have such a good view of both aviation and hotel data. Hopefully, that data will change as vaccine rollouts happen throughout the region, and we get clear policy guidelines for travel. And hopefully, we'll see more light at the end of the tunnel. So let me quickly just wrap up here. Just wanted to mention, I think this has been asked a couple times in the chat. Yes, the presentations will be available. I think Caroline had said in the chat, if you wanted to share the link in the chat, that if you wanted the Euromonitor presentation, you just can click on that link. Also send an email out to all delegates with the link to the presentations, and then how you can contact Euromonitor to get a copy of their presentation as well. So also the video will be available on, this is actually being streamed live through Facebook. So after the end of this will be available on Facebook. So if you missed any part of it, you can go back and watch it. We'll also upload this to our YouTube channel. So just give us a couple of days, it'll be there. So you can always go back and watch any parts that you may have missed, or just review parts that you want to go back and review and do more detail. So all of our live webinars are, of course, you can see our calendar of webinars on our PATA page at pada.org/webinars. All of our upcoming webinars are there. You can, as I said, you can view all of our recorded webinars at our PATA YouTube page. That's youtube.com, just search PATA TV. So this webinar and all of our previous webinars, even sessions from our events. So like the PATA Annual Summit we had just a couple of weeks ago. We had some great speakers, the CEO of Agoda, WeGo, TripAdvisor. We had CEO of Dubai Airports and President of Emirates. So all the sessions, they're on our YouTube channel is there. When you're there, like, subscribe, share it with your friends and colleagues. I want to just give you a quick updates. So as Professor Song had said, we will be releasing our updated visitor forecast. It will be released, I believe, on June 1st. All those reports are available on our website at www.pada.org. Just search under research, it says catalog. You can find all our reports there. We have the executive summary, we have the full report. We also have the 39 destination level reports. And so you can all view that there, and any other reports we've had in the past. Just want to give you an update about our event that's happening next week. It's our PATA Adventure Travel Conference in March. It's under the theme Regeneration for the Adventure Industry. It's happening on May 26th to the 27th, and it's sponsored by our good friends at the Department of Tourism of the Philippines. We have a two half-day forums. So on the first day in the morning, we have a forum. On the second day, in the afternoon, there's a forum. And of course, there's business matching between buyers and sellers. Visitor registration is open now, so just go to our website and you can register as a visitor and watch the forum, and there's even walk-in meetings if you want to meet with some of the sellers. So if you have any questions about today's webinar, about any of our activities, feel free to contact me. My email address is very easy. It's paul@pada.org. Any other information you have about PATA, you want to learn more about PATA, what we do, what activities we have besides just our webinars and our events, but we also do many other things, you know, the Crisis Resource Center, some of tradings. You can go to our website, www.pata.org. And with that, once again, thank you to all of our speakers for sharing that time with us. I know we're a bit over. Thank you all of you who stayed for the whole entire time. Thank you for everyone who's watching us on YouTube or on Facebook. And thank you all to our members, life members, chapter members for your continued support. And with that, that is the end of today's webinar. I will see you at our next event next week at the PATA Adventure Travel Conference in March. Take care and have a good day.